I'm Annette Insdorff, and I don't think, am I live now? I'm live, good. It is my distinct pleasure to have been asked to do this, to moderate tonight with such amazing actors. Please join me in welcoming Edward Norton, Emma Stone, and Michael Keaton. All right. I'm going to start off with a question.
Thank you. Always say please and thank you.
The last time that the three of you and I were on a stage together was in early October.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I think.
Not quite. Birdman had not yet opened, and we did a preview screening in my series at the 92nd Street Y. And at that time, we talked about this as something new that no one had seen yet. And in the interim, the critical and commercial acclaim for this film have been quite enthusiastic. And what I'm going to ask you now is, for each of you, whether you're at all surprised by the way that this film has been embraced in every aspect, from its creativity and experimental quality to the story that it tells about actors. Did you know that it would click in this way? Any of you
I'm not sure. No. The answer is no. I'm always surprised at things, at everything, basically. But yeah, I'm awake. Holy shit!
That is exactly how I feel right now.
But I think first of all, I start with this. You go, oh, that guy's great. This director. Okay, so this is going to be, there's a point below which it's not going to drop, would be my guess, and you can only go up from there, and it kept going up. And then as the process went on, I thought, oh boy, this is going to be interesting and very difficult, but I have no idea yet. Now we're starting to shoot it, and I go, and then the cast started to get assembled, and then I went, oh boy, when the names kept coming in, these guys and Amy and Andrea and everybody and Zach and all the other smaller roles, then I thought, oh boy, well, now this is really getting more than interesting. This is getting really good. And then shooting it, I went, wow, I don't know what I'm in here, but this sure is fun. And so, and then when I saw it, it wasn't like anything I've ever experienced, to be honest with you. It was just not like anything I ever experienced in terms of being in a movie theater. I just kind of was knocked out and had to go think about it for a while, and really wanted to see it again. And as it's grown, the best part of it is how unbelievably appreciative people are of what it is. They people on the street, they're specific about what they experience. They're so specific. People who are not in the entertainment industry, and that is one of the most gratifying things, really.
And Edward, did you know that this was going to have the kind of acclaim that it is?
No, I don't think you can really. It's tough to relate to anything while you're doing it. You can't have a relationship with a result that hasn't happened, and if you've done enough, anybody who's worked on anything creative knows that it's very hard to foretell how it's going to land in people, and I try not to think too much about that, and certainly not worry about it. I think that you just have to have a conviction that it touches you on whatever levels it's operating on, which it certainly did to me even from first reading. And you have to have conviction, especially in a case like this, in the author of it, in someone like Alejandro, which I had abundant faith, and I was an enormous fan of his work, and really had told him for a long time that I was up. I was up for almost anything he wanted to do, because his films are so unusual and so original that even as someone who makes films, I always used to watch his films and marvel at the process, wonder what the process was by which he made a film like that, because they were so unfamiliar to me. And I really was interested in getting inside, being a part of whatever the process was that he went through to create those. And he's such an outsized personality, and such an exuberant personality, that I knew it would be fun, and it was. And I think you like Michael said, you just can't know, especially because he was attempting something incredibly audacious on a technical level, which there were all kinds of ways that even if you believed in it, it was ripe. It was vulnerable. What he was doing was vulnerable to a certain kind of creative failure, just because he didn't cheat. He didn't shoot cutaways or give himself what you'd call like optionality in the editing room. And so he was very committed to this idea that he was going to make these enormous pieces of continuous flow work. And at times I thought, I wonder if this is going to cohere, and if it's going to be able to levitate and stay up in some ways. So I think there were many intriguing question marks around it, but the only thing I could say is that I felt I had many moments throughout the process of it where I got a very distinct sensation watching him and Emmanuel Lubetsky work on it, that they were in a different gear, that they were in the zone, like the way when you see, Kobe Bryant in one of those games, and you can just tell that the guy is operating in a different, stratosphere. And I felt that they were on fire. Like they really seemed like they were doing something extraordinary, and they had the aura around them of guys who are completely committed to the idea that they're going to do something and pull it off. And that was exciting. I really enjoyed it. It was incredible to watch people who are in the zone in that way.
And I don't know if you want to comment on this at all, or had you also seen Alejandro González Iñárritu's previous films before you signed on?
I'd not seen all of them, but I had seen a couple of Alejandro's films. I still don't really know who he is. But if someone could explain, that would be fantastic, because he yelled a lot.
He was the dark-haired guy yelling.
He's great. He's great. It felt, and I had seen a couple of his films, and when I sat down with him and thought he was, of course, amazing, and it was never even a consideration that this was a man that I, at some point, could work with. But we sat down to have lunch, and I thought, when you were saying how this would land, it was a comedy, a very, very dark comedy. So that I felt a little bit warmer to, like it wasn't exactly 21 grams. And so I didn't know, of course, how it would be received or that any of this would come of it. But I thought maybe actors would be the only people that could relate to this movie. So what do you guys think? And who is Alejandro? 2 questions. But it's obviously so far transcended just actors being able to relate to this, and it's really the story of ego and how we wrestle with these opinions of ourselves and what we want to prove to the world. And I think that's something that absolutely everyone can relate to. And Alejandro, whoever he is, keeps saying that his Birdman, has dictated so much of his life, and this is kind of the most personal movie he's ever made. Not kind of, completely the most personal movie he's ever made. And Edward keeps saying that every character is Alejandro, including the two women making out. Especially the two women making out.
I actually do think. I don't think it's not a joke. I think, Freud, it's like Freud's interpretation of dreams. Everyone who appears in your dream is really you. I am completely convinced that everybody in this movie is Alejandro, because I think everything that Shiner says in the film, is absolutely straight out of his mouth. He believes it's exactly how he feels about art versus commerce. But I think everything about Reagan is what he fears and who he relates deeply to that. I think everything that Emma's character expresses is what he thinks about all the time because of his interactions with his kids. Mm-hmm. And I do think two beautiful actresses kissing is his sexuality, right there. I think every aspect of this is a guy taking his own internal conversations with himself and characterizing it.
And to be able to put that into this kind of format and turn yourself inside out in that way and have this sort of reaction to it is just, that's the bravest thing I can imagine.
Yeah, this is the ultimate write what you know.
But even I, who discovered Amores Perros about 20 years ago, and then, watched 21 Grams and Babel with such excitement, I was not prepared for what Birdman would be. This is, staking out some new turf. And I think, especially for a group of actors, you know better than anyone else how challenging it is if you're going to be doing a 10-minute take where every actor has to hit his mark and nothing can be saved in the editing, as you said, no optionality. So this is, for an actor, I would presume, quite challenging. One of the questions that came in from the Twitter feed and email from the Los Angeles group that was watching simultaneously was what your first impression was when you found out that would be the way the film would be shot, that it would be these continuous long takes. And my second question for myself is, could you talk a little about the process of getting there? For example, I think you had 3 weeks of rehearsal in Los Angeles. Was that more for lines and blocking? At what point was the camera, the presence of the camera, when did that become one of the defining aspects of the performance?
There's a lot to say about this, so I'll speak even quicker than I normally speak. And that's all I have to say. There's so much to say about it. There's so much to say about it, and I think the rehearsal process was longer, and the rehearsal process was really meticulous. When you're trying to make a movie, the rehearsal process varies. And in this case, it's a small budgeted movie, and it had all those factors attached to it, so everything got heightened anyway, but there was really no other way to make this movie. And so personally, I think the first part of your question was, what was our reaction? And my reaction was just, oh wow, okay, that's interesting. It really wasn't much more than that. I thought, well, that'll be hard, and I thought I knew how hard it was, and I wasn't even close to realizing how hard it was. And then you just kind of get there and you start to work. You start to do go through the rehearsal process, and everyone has their own type of rehearsal process, I assume. But what he did, and this really would take too long to explain, what they did is extraordinary. I mean, as John Lesher, one of the producers, says, we basically shot the movie 3 times because they literally would come and have to, down to the foot, and sometimes literally inches, measure where the scenes were, the rooms and the backstage of the theater and the theater, literally the stage itself. And later on, we kind of had access to sidewalks, so we could come here and rehearse on sidewalks. But they would duplicate it and go to a soundstage in LA and tape it out. And when we started rehearsing, we had to walk down a made-up hallway that was taped on a soundstage floor. The set was basically taped, and we walked down, and we would time it. They would time it. We would rehearse lines and rehearse lines. And sometimes, if you got to here and the line was just a little, you had to come, because Zach might be coming around the corner, and it was key that because of the camera work and then lighting and literally everything else, you really had to be there sometimes within this amount of space. So, if an actor, how do you rationalize that? How do you, and for me, I kind of like that weirdly. I kind of like to see if I can figure out how to justify it and, how I'm motivated to get there and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so then when the process, I just kind of flew through what was really, excuse me. Sorry, I get really excited. I just flew through that process, which was really, really intricate. And then when you get there and you start to do it, and I'll let these guys explain their own experience. Ed once said something in one of these that I hadn't thought about, which was, it really got to the point where it's kind of liberating. I didn't realize that that's what was going on with me, that I was actually being liberated by it. But it's weirdly fun. But when someone says, was it hard? And you go, yeah, but hard's just hard. That's all it is. It's just that thing. It doesn't mean hard. Therefore what? It's hard. So and then hard gets really interesting to me. Because I'm challenged by it, and I want to see if I can just even accomplish it. And then I want to see if I can be any good at it, whatever it is. And so it was hard, but it was really fun in a really weird kind of way. And I think everybody would probably agree with that. And then, there's this, you can't help but have this camaraderie because it's the ultimate team sport anyway, filmmaking. And then it gets intensified because we're all trying to figure out if we can just pull off a scene, just the scene. And when you would, it was really exhilarating. And then within that, you say, but wait a minute, I actually have to try to be believable and hopefully good in this scene, So there's all that, and it got to be also another thing I just thought about when Ed said how he would watch Chivo, Emmanuel Lubetsky, and Alejandro work. That was true, and I look back now when I see this movie, and the only thing that makes me feel bad is that we had no choice but to be locked in. You had to be locked in. Even if you're off talking a little bit, I can't not be locked in. I'm always kind of there, and I was always afraid to step out and not be focused and not be locked into what I do. That I missed a lot of that, the fun of it, how crazy this thing was, how amazing this experiment was. It's not like we were, doing any medical breakthroughs or, but it was really,
You weren't.
Yeah, she's got a big ego. I miss some of that, and when I look back now and I remember like a little scene, I think, oh man, that was kind of great. I hope I didn't miss that, like my character says. I hope I didn't really miss that because, I was just thinking, dude, you just gotta stay focused here, I just kind of phased out there. After that little guttural noise I made, you guys kind of...
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
I agree with you now in retrospect about that kind of structure of it ultimately being one of the most liberating things about it, because you were in this circumstance where you just had to perfect the same thing over and over, and then something clicked in you at a certain point where you just had to completely let go and just kind of trust that you were sailing through this very specific...
That you get to run, you get to get going, let the reins out a little, and let that fucker run, instead of saying, well, you got, an hour or 25 minutes, go sit in your trailer, which drives me out. Yeah, and you don't have that. So you don't have the luxury, that everybody else has. We all get when we normally make a film, granted, but you had the other thing, which was, man, I get to let this horse just go, baby, and hopefully I got to hang on, but, sorry.
You're such a jerk.
I'll tell you another thing. No.
See why he was
This is what it was like.
Cast in this movie?
This is what it was like. But the rehearsal, to answer your question about the camera and when the camera was integrated, at least in my experience, the very beginning, I mean, Chivo or whoever was operating the camera in the scene, Chivo being Emanuel Lubetsky, the cinematographer, or whoever the camera operator was for that specific scene, which it was mostly Chivo, I think.
Chris.
Well, Chris did a ton, but Chivo did a lot of the up close.
I don't know. I'm not going to interrupt anymore.
All right. They were another participant in the scene, at least in my experience. It was, they were just as close to you as your fellow actors, which is pretty rare, I think. For the most part, you try to ignore the camera completely, and I think that was also the case, sort of. But you were dancing with the cameraman, which was pretty fantastic to get used to this, animal that you try to block out a lot of the time. Or not you, I do. I try to block them out a lot of the time, but this time it was not really the case, and it felt like a dance, which was very, very cool.
Yeah, I thought that part of it was in the rehearsals. It was just like having the camera guys incorporated much earlier than normal, and in a much more fundamental way, because you were essentially it was the normal process of rehearsal as one might normally experience it, rehearsing a play or rehearsing a movie that's actually taking time to rehearse it, except that at the moment that you were at the same time that you were figuring out what's the organic flow of this interaction, you had to factor for how they were simultaneously going, all right, well, if that's the natural flow, how are we gonna cover that and do the handoffs? And it was kind of a give and take of sometimes we had to adapt and rethink the choreography and the blocking, if you want to call it that, to be more conducive to artful coverage with one camera without cutting, and sometimes they had to come up with a different idea than they'd had going in if we felt like things. And I think it produced really interesting things in both directions. Like Michael gave a great example of that scene where Amy comes in and he's lying on the thing. His choice to do that, which is such a terrific way to find him emotionally, was really driven more by the fact that they really just couldn't split an intimate scene like that without cross-cuts, and so they had to figure out how to work with the mirror and put them in the same plane. And then other times, like where maybe our ability to flex was lower, like when Emma and I were on the roof, we were very limited by the actual, the staging of it being on the edge, and so it forced them to adapt a creative way of covering two people having an intimate conversation on the roof. And I just thought it was there was these moments I think we all had where it was tricky, but when you would discover the fluid, artful way of letting these scenes play with a camera in this wonderful unbroken flow, you would suddenly look at each other and go, why do we do this any other way? Yeah. It's just the only reason we don't do this is because we're too lazy to figure out beautifully rendered shots like this. And there's still things when I watch it, I love the way that they used mirrors to create coverage of both sides at the same time. And you kind of, that it goes too far to say you could do all movies this way. You obviously couldn't, and some movies it wouldn't be right for the aesthetic of the film. But it was amazing to me to see how often you realize that a lot of what you take for granted in filmmaking as people who make films is really much less prescribed than you think it is. You know, they found such interesting ways to do it, and then it created. I do think there was an enormous energy that gets injected. There's a different kind of energy that gets injected into the performance of something when it doesn't get constantly broken apart into these repetitious fragments, and as Michael indicated too, it produced kind of a fantastic sense of collective collaboration, because normally we all know, you know, you make films and 60% of the people, everyone looks and sees what's the shot, and about 60% of people go, I'm not involved, you know, and on cast and crew, and on this, everybody was involved all the time. All the production people, all the sound guys, all, you know, the camera, most of the cast. And so everybody's holding each other up, you know, and you know, and the boom guy could drop it into frame midway through an 11-minute sequence, and that's the end of that one, you know, or an actor who steps in for one line could mess it up. And so the kind of the collective prayer that no one's gonna botch it, or that I'm not gonna botch it, gets this energy starts flowing into the whole thing, and something that I've never ever experienced on a film in 20 years making films. Like, you know, we would go a day to get it, and when Alejandro would finally kind of like scream "Eso," you know, or "Bravo," like then it was like a World Cup soccer goal. The whole cast and crew, you know, the entire cast and crew screams and like jumps up and down. You know, we got it. And there was like a collective, there was a celebratory experience in every day because of that. That was very, very special and unusual, I thought.
Well, what you've just described is like the quintessence of ensemble work, yeah, which isn't always the case on a film.
With the crew, too, you know, with right, like literally everybody.
Now, for Michael Keaton, as Riggin, you are alternately compelling, riveting, pathetic, vulnerable, sympathetic, superhuman, playing a superhero once upon a time, and now not as Riggin. It helps that you played Batman, obviously, but I want to know... I want to know a little bit more about exactly what it was that Alejandro said to you, did with you, to bring you to this really evolved state of performance. Because I think many of us here have been admiring your work for a long time. I would go even back to Night Shift and Mr. Mom and Beetlejuice, for Christ's sakes. But this is, I think, for most of us, of another order. This is an evolved state of performance based on an extraordinary script and direction. Can you tell us more about what is it that Alejandro did to gain your trust, perhaps, that would allow you to do this? Was it that he wanted you to improvise or to stick to the script? I mean, to give us any sense of detail of what it was that made you into Riggin.
Well, just like these two really great actors sitting next to me, and actually any actor, really, the opportunity has to be there. You just have to have an opportunity, you know. That it's really that simple. It starts with that, and then I just look at it like I look at everything else. I think from the first time, you know, the first feature I ever did, I had done a little television movie and done some television work and a couple of plays when I was starting. But the first feature I ever did, that character, you know, Night Shift, that character is really fun to play, and I based it on, you know, what I read in the script and my imagination, and then guys I grew up with, and I just went to work, and I thought, all right, who's this guy? And I worked on him and worked on him and worked on him and auditioned and worked with my wardrobe in my house and blah, blah, blah. You just did that work, and then I say, okay, he's this guy, I think he's this guy. And they go, oh yeah, that looks good, and then they hire you, and then you do that guy. So if I'm still doing this, you know, somewhere down the line, something else going, I'm just going to do the same thing. Honestly, that's really really that simple. And so this is, you know, I'm an actor, and yes, I did play, you know, the character of Batman, I'm an actor, so I've had hot spells and cool spells and great spells, and mostly it's, if you look at it, the trajectory, it's really like everyone's, really, and so there's that. But frankly, you just say, okay, what's the job? What's my job? I shoveled asphalt one summer off the back of a truck, and my job was kind of really simple, but I really dug the job because it was this really, I don't know anybody's done this, it's really hard because I would get obsessed with, because my favorite part of the shoveling off the back, I always wanted to be on the back when they'd shovel, because you would grade it with a big rake like this. And I would always try to get it really, really flat. I'm a little crazy. And I would really get into it at the end of the day. And it's a horrible job. You're filthy and sweaty and stuff like that. But that's the gig. My gig is this. So that's how I look at it. So when Alejandro enters the picture, if this would have happened 15 years ago, I would like to think I would just go to work and the guy we would look at each other, talk, go, okay, let's go try to do this, and then we'd just go do, and I would have done it then, or I'd do it later. But with him, when he enters the picture, he's intoxicating, this guy, and I just think if you're not coming up to whomever, you're in a scene with these guys, you got to come up to what they're doing, and when you see someone like Alejandro be so committed, and in work at that level, and so detail oriented and push himself that much, you're really a punk if you're not going there too. If you're just slacking off, that just won't do. So I can't help but try to keep up with that, And so he really brings, and he's a taskmaster, but it really was really refreshing to be around someone like that, frankly, who would kind of drive you crazy, but that kind of stuff doesn't really drive me crazy. As long as the intention is to make something really great, I'm all in, man. It's bullshitters, who then I lose interest. But he's highly intelligent. He's an artist, and he's not afraid. And I think the most exciting thing about this was the fear factor was so high that you just. Only in that there's no going back when you have a scene like that with Amy Ryan. There's no. That's you get to the real simple truth, and the simple truth is everybody's felt some version of what I felt in that scene, and millions of people are going to see me, and you go, it doesn't really matter if millions of people see me. It's what the truth is, and the truth is this, and I don't want to make more of it than it is. I just want to say what the truth was in that particular scene, and then in the next scene, the truth is that. And so I guess the fear of it is that you'll fuck it up, that you'll be in this big experiment, and you'll miss it. You'll just go, I was going there and I missed it. I should have never missed it. I'd like to redo that. So the fear is the same as any play or movie or television show, that you won't do it well. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting, though, that not like the rest of this wasn't fascinating, but and I'm curious to see if you guys are like this. When you look at I'll be honest with you. I look at some of my work, my movies, and I look at them, and I'm fairly flat on it. I read it pretty accurately. I go, oh boy, really don't know what I was thinking there. That was bad. I don't know what, that was pretty horrible. But I don't go crazy and think, oh, you're the worst. And then I'll see a scene and I'll go, yeah, that's good right there. I got that. It did that. Blah 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 blah. But the ones that will drive you craziest, I don't know, well, I do know why it is when it comes to the funny, when it comes to the comedy, that you'll go back and you'll go, oh man, one little more hairbrush, just one little finer brush on that, or just should have got walked out the door a second early, or the timing of it. Those are the ones that ultimately me anyway, I'll go, almost, or I'd like to have another shot at that one. It's always the funny beats. So that whole thing about comedy is hard and all that, I never buy into any of those cliches, but maybe it is because those are the ones that those are the ones I'll kind of like, not suffer over, but they'll drive me a little, I'll obsess over.
too. Is it still on? Yeah. I think Alejandro is the kind of director that you really have to surrender to. You have to decide going in that his films are unique enough that you want to crawl inside his process and not be too defensive or self-defensive at all as an actor. And I think I'm saying this because I think a lot of what Michael's saying is kind of intrinsic to actors and performance. But the thing that's tough is that not tough, but unique to someone like Alejandro is that he really likes to. He's in this dialogue with himself about what the balance of this very tricky, multi-dimensional film should be in terms of comedy, in terms of pathos, in terms of drama. And sometimes I started to have this awareness that he was tearing his hair, and of course the actor's ego go, he's not happy with what I'm doing, why? I think it's great. Or what you do all these things and you realize he's not even having a dialogue of frustration about what's going on that you're doing. He's in this struggle to figure out in his own mind what's the right balance. And you have to dispense with sometimes a lot of the normal assessment that you're doing of your own performance and recognize that sometimes he's just going to go, I need this to be the exact opposite of what you're doing right now. And you have to go, okay, then I'm going to be the actor who gives you everything I've got in the opposite direction. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to do it. Because he may well come in after that and go all the way back to the other thing, or go 90 degrees now this way. It's not about, he needs you. I just think he's the kind of filmmaker, and at least in this film, he's hunting for so many levels at the same time that he needs to be able to come in on you and change it up radically. I mean, I would say one of the biggest challenges for us, especially like the first scene where we meet and start to rehearse right away. I think Michael and I thought, just like he was saying, oh, this is clipping, this is nice, this is funny.
Yeah.
But Alejandro came in like really frustrated, and I began to, over a couple takes, what I think we both began to perceive is, it's not really even, we're thinking about tone and comedy beats, and he's just thinking about pace. All he was thinking about was pace. All he wanted was to see, he was terrified that it was going to lag and that it was going to go on too long. And he needed us to go through the exercise, which we did, of accelerating it to the point that it was, if you're worried or if you don't trust a director, you would freeze because you'd go, this is off. This is no way this is working at this pace.
Right.
But he needed it to go to a pace where even he could say, okay, that's too far. That's not working. Now I can confidently say, all right, let it go back to there. And I think people in this group understand it better. It's more than sort of the average civilian in some sense. It's like, it's a challenge. It's a wonderful kind of challenge, but I think he's the kind of filmmaker you just have to check you really do have to check your own like internal kind of assessments at the door and say, I am going to, I'm gonna serve. I'm gonna serve him because I trust what he's going for, and what he's going for in this particular case is very unique, and it creates interesting moments. I mean, it creates moments of pretty profound self-doubt, I think, about whether, in fact, you were calibrating it where your instincts told you, but because you have to trust that he's looking at this continuum in a way that was different than we were, and it was unusual. You had to throw a lot of clay against the wall and trust that he was going to pick the pieces that made him happy.
In fact, Alejandro said that when he had lunch with Mike Nichols and told him about the project, the initial thing Mike Nichols said was, this sounds just terrible, don't do it. But then gave him one piece of advice when it was clear that Alejandro wasn't giving up. He said, once you've got what you want, make it go faster. So it sounds to me like Alejandro took that to heart. A question for Emma Stone, because you are now on Broadway playing Sally Bowles in Cabaret. Was the experience of doing this film about theater a good preparation for your Broadway debut?
Well, Alejandro keeps emailing me asking me if I feel like I'm in Birdman, because I'm walking through the hallways of Studio 54, and everyone at the theater in the company that's seen the movie comes up to my dressing room and knocks on the door and says, it's like we're in the movie. It's a great movie. It really does. It really does feel like you're in the movie when you're running up and down those stairs and doing a quick change. But I mean, sort of in a sense, because there is that structure too, especially maybe in a musical, because the tempo and the pace needs to remain in the same, and I'm sure that it's this way with a play too. I just haven't done a play professionally, only this musical. The tempo needs to kind of remain in a similar, the structure needs to remain pretty similar each night. And so it is sort of that feeling of, the blocking is so specific, what leads you into a song is so specific, and then you're liberated because you have such a great sense of structure. So this did, I think, prepare me in a way for that. But, I mean, I don't know. It's pretty crazy. And I get to do it again. That's another thing. With Birdman, you knew that there was going to be a point in the day where something was going to be permanent. And that doesn't happen in Cabaret. Yeah. You get to try again. And I haven't had the kind of crippling anxiety that I would have on certain days in Birdman, knowing that at some point something had to stick. And even if you were 12 hours in, and you hadn't found it yet, you were going to go until you found it. And then it was going to be a movie that people were going to see over and over, and it was going to be permanent. So that added an extra level of, forever feeling.
And a question that I'll start with Edward Norton, because you're based more, I think, in New York than not. It seems to me that New York is a character in this film, too, despite the focus on the actors and inside the theater. And I was wondering if for you, could this film have been shot anywhere but New York? Would it have been different if the city had been Los Angeles or London?
Not LA, but I think London. Maybe there's a London version of this. But I think the reason that it is right to have rooted this in New York is because there's a relationship between the New York theater community and the Hollywood, this idea of Hollywood that doesn't really exist, but the idea of the film industry, and there's a wonderful kind of hilarious tension or mutual covetousness or whatever you want to infer into it, but the relationship, I think Shiner's line about this isn't the backlot, this is New York, and this is how we do things. That's like what's tattooed on the back of every actor in New York's neck, spiritually speaking. And I think it's, I think that there's a very uniquely New York spirit to it.
I don't think Phoenix would have worked.
No. Very, very hard to walk between the theater and the bar in Phoenix. It's like blocks and blocks and blocks.
And it's so hot.
And since we are going to have to wrap this up quickly, I have been asked by one of the cards, because this is a group of actors after all, do you have a piece of advice? Is there anything that you, especially based on the Birdman experience, have to propose to other actors, starting with Michael Keaton?
I'd probably I'm not kidding, would take as much advice from y'all as I would give to you, because I'm open to anything. I listen to older people, younger people. I'm open to listen to anybody, anything that'll help. I would only say that occasionally when someone, when they're always younger, asks, I just always say, don't be afraid, and find a space somewhere. Just find a space and just go stand up and I mean, anywhere you can get on a stage. I'd say it's space because I actually worked a couple times when I was starting out and there was no stage. There was just a floor and people sitting right there, There was nothing. And so, but it was me in front of people, either writing something I had written or performing something I had written or performing something that a playwright had written, and I just kept making myself do it. I just kept making a fool of myself, and man, make as many mistakes as you can make. Just go and do not ever, ever, ever be afraid to be foolish. Just be stupid and foolish and fall down and make a fool of yourself and keep on going. Keep on keeping on.
Emma, if I can turn this over to you.
You're supposed to follow that. No, that reminds me, there was this Lucille Ball quote that said, "I'm not funny, what I am is brave." Yeah. And that's really what it is. It is that bravery. And God, I don't have any advice. What do you... someone sent me, this is quoting someone else again, but someone sent me, on my opening night, The Actor's Vow by Elia Kazan, which I'm sure everybody here has read, which is just amazing and really simple. But one of the lines that I keep saying over and over to myself is, "I am not a cosmic orphan. I have no reason to be timid." Which is so, because the thing you want to do so much of the time, especially when you get out on a stage or in front of a really, really bare close-up camera, is shrink. Just shrink down and become a smaller version of yourself, and And that, I don't know, that spoke to me. Both of those things, I guess, are talking about the same thing. Be foolish.
Never follow Michael Keaton and Emma Stone. It's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, but I taught you that. That was the advice I gave you.
Well, it was good advice. I'm not sure I have glib advice. I think look for good people, and if you find good people, keep working with them over and over again. I think the more I've been lucky enough to get to go to do the work more than once with people. That's just been a total joy to me. And I think finding those people that you have a chemistry with and kind of a shorthand with, and that you can, go on the journey with multiple times, it really does return. It returns something to the process, a trust or a shorthand or a comfortability that's this was the second time I've worked with Naomi on this film, and that was wonderful for me because she's one of my favorite people, and we've gone through it together before, and I think I find myself envious of people who have had those relationships where they work with they have close collaborators over many years and many projects. I think that's something to very that's very precious and is worth seeking.
Well, in conclusion, maybe I'll just throw in a little summary, because to this question of what is Alejandro, because I'm fortunate that I've met him quite a few times, he seems to be an ebullient Mexican with infectious energy that we've talked about, who has remarkably good taste in selecting the best actors to realize his vision. Thank you for joining us tonight.